Well, howdy folks. Now, I got a question that's been eating at gun guys for decades, and it goes something like this. How in the Sam Hill did an Italian pistol end up kicking America's sweetheart, the 1911, right out of Uncle Sam's holster after 74 years of faithful service? The decision to drop the Beretta M9 wasn't some bureaucratic screw-up or foreign conspiracy. It was actually one of the most grueling, scientific, and downright brutal pistol trials in military history. And by the time I'm done telling you this story, you're going to understand exactly why the M9 didn't just replace a 1911, it absolutely demolished every American-made pistol that tried to compete. We're talking about a trial so intense that most American gun companies didn't even show up to the rematch that they demanded. So, grab yourself a cold one and some popcorn and settle in, because I'm about to dive into the real story of how Italy conquered America's sidearm one reliability test at a time. Now, to understand why this decision was so controversial, you gotta paint the scene in 1980. The 1911 had been America's primary sidearm since, well, 1911. That's 69 years of faithful service through 2 world wars, Korea and Vietnam. This wasn't just a gun, it was a piece of American heritage designed by the legendary John Moses Browning himself. But here's the thing most folks don't realize. By 1980, the heritage there was becoming a problem. See, the 1911s in military service weren't the pristine collector pieces you see at gun shows. These were guns that had been through hell and back, many of them manufactured during World War II and never properly rebuilt. We're talking about pistols with more miles on them than a 75 Chevy pickup. The NATO Standardization Agreement in 1962 had designated 9mm as the standard pistol cartridge for all NATO forces. America was the only holdout still clinging to 45 ACP, and that was causing logistical nightmares in joint operations. So, in 1980, Uncle Sam made a decision that would shake the gun world to its core. It was time to find a replacement for America's most iconic handgun. Now, when the military decided to replace a legend, they don't mess around. The Joint Service Small Arms Program, or JSSAP as the acronym's loving military called it, laid out requirements that would make a Swiss watchmaker sweat. First up, reliability. The new pistol had to fire 5,000 rounds without a single malfunction. Not 4,999, exactly 5,000. Then it had to be completely disassembled, cleaned, and fire another 5,000 rounds. Still with me? Good, because we're just getting started. Next up is accuracy. The pistol had to put 90% of all its shots within a 4-inch circle at 25 meters. That's about 27 yards for those of us who think in American. This wasn't just a match-grade ammunition here. This is with standard military ball ammo. But honestly, this is the part that gets real interesting. Environmental testing. These pistols had to function in temperatures from negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. They had to work after being dropped in mud, sand, and salt water. They even had to function after being frozen solid and rapidly heated. It's like putting these guns through a torture chamber designed by someone who really hated firearms. So, who did step up to the plate? Well, initially, you had the usual suspects. Smith & Wesson threw their hat in the ring, along with several other American manufacturers, but this is where we take a little turn here, and it gets a little embarrassing for American gun makers. As the trials progressed, American pistols started dropping like flies at a barbecue. One by one, they failed the reliability tests, the environmental test, or the accuracy requirements. Like watching your favorite hometown team get shut out in the championship game over and over again. We had a field of contenders that got whittled down real quick. The HK P7 M13, Smith & Wesson 459M, Walther P88, Colt SSP, FN Herstal BDA, and the Steyr GB all either failed with tests outright or withdrew voluntarily. Only 2 pistols passed the technical and reliability standards, the SIG P226 and the Beretta 92F. Both were foreign-made, both were 9mm, and both had done something just then that, well, no American pistol could do. They had passed every single test the military threw at them. So, this is where the story gets real good. According to documents from Army trials in the 1980s, the SIG P226 and the Beretta 92F were neck and neck in every category. Both pistols were reliable at sunrise and accurate as a Swiss watch and tougher than a $2 steak. The military evaluators were looking at 2 pistols that were essentially tied in performance, but this is where it gets real interesting and a lot more complicated than most folks realize. See, when the dust settled from all that testing, the results weren't quite what you'd expect. The SIG P226 didn't just compete with the Beretta 92F, it actually outperformed in most categories. We're talking about a reliability score of 2,877 rounds between stoppages for the SIG versus 1,750 for the Beretta. To put that in perspective, the old 1911 was averaging just 162. Yeah, the SIG was nearly twice as reliable as the Beretta, and both were light years ahead of the 1911. But here's where it gets real wild. The HK P7 M13 blew both of them out of the water with a 99% reliability rating and a perfect 100% score in the dust test. But all HK withdrew from the competition, probably because they knew their complex squeeze cocker design would be too expensive and too complicated for military use. So they were down to SIG versus Beretta, and the SIG is winning on performance. The P226 could fire over 6,000 rounds before frame cracking, compared to the about, 3,500 for the 1911. In the final 1984 trials, the SIG had only 12 stoppages total, with just one requiring an armorer. The Beretta, 20 stoppages with 9 needing an armorer. That means you had nearly a 50% chance your Beretta would need serious maintenance within 1,700 rounds. Now here, my friends, is where the story takes a turn that would make a Hollywood screenwriter jealous. Originally, SIG's contract bid was $75 million. Beretta came in at $84 million, that is. SIG was not only more reliable, they were cheaper. But then at the last minute, Beretta dropped their price by 18%. Suddenly, they were competitive, and some folks suspected that Beretta might have gotten a peek at SIG's bid, but that was never proven. But anyways, what we do know is that even after that price drop, SIG was still technically cheaper when you looked at the total cost of ownership. The final difference? Just $3 million out of contracts worth tens of millions. And that difference was entirely in magazines and spare parts. Think about that for a minute. The military chose the M9 for $3 million on a contract that would span decades. But here's what really sealed the deal. It had nothing to do with performance or price. The Italian government was lobbying hard for Beretta, and there were promises that production would eventually move to Maryland, creating American jobs. Meanwhile, SIG was still seen as a foreign company, even though they had American manufacturing partnerships. Well, the military brass knew that they had a problem. They had test results showing SIG was superior, but political pressure was mounting for Beretta. So they made a decision that would satisfy the politicians while still getting a pistol that was vastly superior to the 1911. Now, you'd think that that would be the end of the story, right? Nope, wrong. American gun manufacturers and politicians threw a fit that would make a toddler proud. They claimed the trials the Army conducted were rigged, that all the pistols were hand-selected, and the whole thing was unfair to American companies. The military's response? Fine, do it again. So in 1984, they held another trial called the XM9 program. Same tests, same requirements, same torture chamber. And guess what happened? Wouldn't you know, the Beretta 92F won again, and this time there was no arguing with the results. So what exactly did the Beretta bring to the table that American pistols couldn't match? Well, let's break that down. First, the open slide design that some folks love to criticize, well, that's actually a feature, not a bug. The open slide means better ejection, less chance of stovepipe malfunctions, and easier cleaning. Like having a self-clearing mechanism built right into the gun. Second, the double-action, single-action trigger system gave soldiers options. That's always good. First shot is a long, deliberate double-action pull, perfect for stress situations where you don't want accidental discharges. Follow-up shots were crisp single-action pulls for accuracy, like having 2 different triggers in one gun. Now third was the magazine capacity, 15 rounds of 9mm versus 7 rounds of 45 ACP. Now, I know what you're thinking, but 45 ACP has more stopping power, and you're right, it does. But you know what has even more stopping power? Actually hitting your target. And with more than double the ammunition capacity, soldiers had a lot more chances to do just that. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. How did the M9 actually perform in combat? Well, it saw action in Panama, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and countless other operations over its 32-year service life. And you know what? It worked. Soldiers who carried the M9 in combat consistently reported that it was reliable, accurate, and easy to maintain. Sure, it wasn't perfect, no gun is, but it did its job when lives were on the line. In the most famous reliability test, the M9 passed a 20,500 round endurance test. That's not a typo. 20,500 rounds through a single pistol. The gun finally had a lock and block failure at round 19,400 something, but That's still nearly 4 times the original requirement. Now I know what some of y'all are thinking. But what about all them stories about M9s failing in combat? What about the slide fractures? Well, let me tell you the real story behind those incidents, because it's a perfect example of how rumors can spread faster than wildfire at a gas station. Back in the late 1980s, there were reports of M9 slides cracking and potentially injuring shooters. The anti-M9 crowd jumped on this like a duck on a June bug, claiming it proved the pistol was dangerous and unreliable. But here's what actually happened. Winchester had loaded some early 9mm NATO ammunition with standard 9mm powder charges in NATO cases. The problem is that NATO cases have thicker brass, which means less internal volume, which means higher pressure. We're talking about pressure levels that were well beyond what any pistol was ever designed to handle. When the military figured out what was happening, they fixed the ammunition problem, and guess what? The slide fractures stopped. Beretta even developed a slide capture device as an extra safety measure, but the root cause was bad ammo, not a bad gun. And here's the crazy thing. No other military in the world that used the Beretta 92 series ever experienced these problems. It was uniquely an American issue caused by American ammunition. I hate to hear it. But here we are over 40 years later, and what's the verdict on the M9? Well, it served as America's primary sidearm from 1985 all the way to 2017. That's 32 years of faithful service. It was carried by soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines through some of the most challenging conflicts in American history. And when the military finally decided to replace it with the M17, it wasn't because the M9 was failing, it was because technology had moved forward. The M17 offered modularity, better ergonomics, and improved capacity. Today, you can still buy a civilian version of the M9, the Beretta 92 FS, and it's still one of the most reliable, accurate service pistols you can get your hands on. Law enforcement agencies around the world still use it, and it remains popular with civilian shooters who appreciate that smooth action and proven reliability. So there you have it, folks, a real story of why the military picked the M9 to replace the 1911. It wasn't politics, wasn't foreign influence, and it wasn't some conspiracy against American gun makers. It was simple. When put to the test, the Beretta M9 outperformed every other pistol in the most comprehensive trials ever conducted. It was more reliable, more durable, and more practical for military use than anything else available at the time. Now, does that mean the 1911's a bad pistol? Heck no! The 1911 is a masterpiece of engineering that's still going strong after 113 years. But by 1980, it was a 69-year-old design trying to meet 21st century requirements, and that's a tough ask for any piece of equipment. The M9 proved that sometimes the best choice ain't the most popular choice or the most patriotic choice. It's a choice that works when everything else fails, and for 32 years, that is exactly what the M9 did. Now, if you enjoyed learning about the real story behind one of the most controversial decisions in military firearms history, well, make sure you hit that like button harder than a 45 ACP hitting steel. And if you want to see more deep dives into guns that shaped our history, hit the subscribe button and ring that little notification bell thing. But here's something I bet you didn't know. The story of how the M9 became a Hollywood icon is even more interesting than its military adoption. From Lethal Weapon to Die Hard, this Italian pistol became the star of more action movies than any other handgun in history. So, click on that video right there to learn how the M9 went from military sidearm to silver screen superstar. Until next time, keep your powder dry, your groups tight, and remember, sometimes the best American choice ain't made in America, and that is okay. Y'all come back now, you hear?